Good afternoon, everybody. We are just about ready to get started here. I am combining my roles today, so I am both your introduction and moderator here. I'm Kristin Jones. I'm President and CEO of the Indiana Health Industry Forum. I have been told before I am a loud talker, so I will try to modulate my voice for this. Welcome to this month's installment of the Life Sciences Lunch Series. We have been partnering, the Indiana Health Industry Forum and Barnes & Thornburg have been partnering on this event since before any of us can count. It goes back at least to 2000, we know. But we are pleased to be here yet again for another installment of our lunch program. We have a great panel here today. We are going to be talking about medical product development. We're heavy on the Rose-Hulman, but that's okay. It's a great school with a whole lot of talent and much underappreciated, I think, in a lot of cases. So we're here to help raise the flag and do a little brand recognition for you too. So I am going to do just a quick commercial here for the Health Industry Forum. IHIF is the trade association for the health and life science industry here in the state, or biosciences, if you will. We represent a really wide and broad swath of technologies, companies, individuals, and really anyone with an interest in human health or bioscience, and it runs the entire gamut of that. We've spent a lot of time this year working on our website, and I'm happy to report that you can now enroll and renew your memberships online. Membership for small companies starts at just $150 a year. And if you use one of our purchasing programs, you can generally save that on your first order. So if you're a small business and you're thinking towards the end of the year, what do I do with some leftover budget? IHIF is a great place to look at how you can benefit from all of that. Membership does go to support programs like this and some of the other networking and communication events we do. We also have options for BioFutures this year, and you'll see some more information on that in your program. I will end the commercial there. But just say welcome, glad we can have you here, and we're excited to get started today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel. Everyone in front of you, if you picked up a flyer, you'll have their bios in there. But we are here and very delighted to have with us Jake Flagle from 316 Product Development, Dr. Elizabeth Hagerman with Rose-Hulman Ventures and Vice President of Corporate Engagement for Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. And Greg Ottinger, who is the Vice President of Business Development for GMI Corporation. Corporation? Got that part right. So we have a very educated, respected, and informed panel today on talking about medical product development and how you move a product from your white napkin all the way through to development and into people's hands. And that's where the important piece of this all lies. I think just to get started, if each of you, I'm not going to read your bios, but if everybody could just talk a little bit about your background, your role, and where you fit into this process, that would be great. And maybe Jake, we'll start down there with you if you'd like to kick things off for us.
All right, so yeah, my name is Jake Flagle. I was born and raised here in Indianapolis, went to school, as Kristin said, at Rose-Hulman, did my mechanical engineering degree, and then off to Clemson. Did a biomedical master's degree there, and the last 20 years plus I've been in the medical device industry, bringing products to market, small products like needles, wire guides, catheters, up to larger products like drug-eluting stents, vacuum-assisted breast biopsy systems, implantable valves, that sort of things, and as well a lot of projects outside of medical and consumer goods and industrial, automotive, automation. And so the company that I'm here with, 316 Product Development, well, I'm the president and the owner and wear a lot of other hats as well. But basically we help clients bring products to market. So all the way from napkin sketch, prototype, testing, vendor selection, launch, and into sustaining. So we do turnkey projects, and also just if a client needs a little help in one particular area, just due to bandwidth or they need some expertise, we'll focus on that area for the client. So our big thing is our MO is innovate with urgency, right? And we hear that from our clients. A lot of times a 6-month project for our clients will turn it around in 2 or 3 months. So in a fraction of the time. We're a smaller company. yet fully staffed. We have our MEs, double E's, software, firmware, engineering, quality, automation, and even some value-added services like CFO type roles for the smaller companies and a global supply chain expert. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell. I think one of the things, just to share a little bit on the softer side, where our passion and heart is, one of the things that fuels us is giving back to the community too. So 10% of all proceeds we funnel back into the community, and we partner with, one of the places we partner with is Hope Center Indy. It's right here in our backyard and the largest facility of its kind in the country, rescuing women out of sex trafficking. So it's something that is amazing, the things that are going on there. I put that in as a little plug for them. I don't get any kickbacks on it or anything like that. But if you're interested on the personal level of serving, or even on the business side of connecting with a place like Hope Center Indy, let me know afterwards and I'll tell you all about it. So.
Elizabeth, would you like to connect?
My name is Elizabeth Hagerman, and as Kristin mentioned, I graduated from Rose-Hulman, also chemical engineering, and then I figured out along the way that biomedical engineering was a place where I had even more passion. So for my master's and PhD, I went to UCLA to do biomedical engineering with more of a focus in tissue engineering. And then following that, I was with Baxter Healthcare. They were also just developing their regenerative medicine division at the time. I graduated from UCLA, so it was a really nice fit. That led me into many roles for product innovation, product development, product acquisition. And then with that experience, I came back to Rose-Hulman Ventures in 2012. And Rose-Hulman Ventures, which you'll be hearing about today some more, it's part of Rose-Hulman, and we operate it like an engineering consulting firm kind of within the bounds of Rose-Hulman. So we have, similar to Jake, a full-time engineering staff who are experienced engineers who have been in industry. They have the technical and management expertise to lead a project. And then we hire students to work on those projects with us as interns. So it's a great place for students to get experience with high-stakes projects and for clients to really get some valuable engineering work done, also while training the next generation of engineers. We happen to serve many different industries, but biomedical tends to be one of the strongholds of our business. I think there's a ton of student interest there because you can pretty readily see the impact you're having on people, and the biomedical industry, as we were discussing earlier, just it touches everything. There's software, mechanical, electrical, chemical, so there's no shortage of needs in terms of skill sets to continue to develop the biomedical industry.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for your attendance. Back when I graduated from Rose-Hulman, life sciences wasn't as big of a deal as it is today, and automotive was strong. So I went to work at General Motors for 20 years. And ironically, back then, Dr. Halbert was the president of Rose-Hulman, and he had me in his office several times, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But for the good part, he was trying to talk me into going to work for Zimmer, which was really getting a start back then, and he was doing a lot of work himself on joint redesigns. And it took me 23 years to heed his advice and reinvent myself, and I came crossed over after achieving some high executive levels at GM in both operations and also in product development and engineering management. I reinvented myself over into the medical device industry, and one of the first things I learned was that, yeah, I didn't have any FDA experience, but I had a lot of DOT experience, and there's not a lot of difference. I mean, you're driving 80 mile an hour down the highway in an automobile, you want to make sure it's working correctly, and there's a lot of regulations that dictate that. And I worked at a firm that did a lot of the actual rules in the department. And so it was a crossover. And some other things that I learned pretty quickly in the world of manufacturing and medical devices, they were way behind automotive when it came to quality, lean manufacturing, and Six Sigma implementation. So I've counseled with a lot of peers and mentored a lot of younger people who are looking to do the same that I have done, and as far as reinventing myself. And that's the two main things I tell them. Don't sell yourself short. Automotive is a strong place that you came out of. So today at GMI Corporation, we are a contract manufacturer of electromechanical devices. I found out gosh, 25 years ago with my first Myers-Briggs exam that GM made us all take annually, that I was an extroverted engineer. So for the first time in my life, instead of being in the factory and helping build processes or design products or actually run the manufacturing floor, I'm out and about shaking the trees and looking for new opportunities for our small contract manufacturing company to design and develop. And probably the best compliment I can get, whether I'm at a trade show or what have you, is within 2 minutes of the conversation, people will say, "You don't sound like a sales guy." Thank you. That's typically my response, because I can get to the meat and potatoes pretty quickly when it comes to what you have on your napkin, and is that something that's possible? Is it feasible? We have a product development organization very similar to Jake that we can meet you from the cocktail napkin stage, mid-development stage, or maybe you think you have it designed and you're ready to manufacture, which sometimes puts a red flag and the hairs up on the back of our neck, because if that person has no manufacturing or that team has no manufacturing experience, we want to make sure we walk them through their design and review it to look for any fallacies, so that we don't have any issues when they launch the product. But we can take a customer, especially if it's a startup company, which we work with a lot of them from the very beginning to the end, or if it's a more established corporation that has their own development team and they're not into manufacturing this particular type of product or product at all, we'll meet them at the end and help them in prototyping and getting the thing to launch. Thanks, Kristin.
Great, Greg. And that's actually a great lead-in. One thing I will mention, we were joking earlier with the title of the program today. We do accept questions from the audience, and if you would like to write them either on the white note cards or on your napkin, we will be happy to take those as we go throughout the program. We'll work them into the conversation, and we always want to try and make sure we answer as many questions from the folks in attendance as we possibly can. That was also a great lead-in to the next question. We were talking earlier about Indiana and sort of the landscape here in the state, and we can take it a little bit broader than that. I would throw out there that while Indiana is frequently billed as a medical device state, we are really much more of a medical technology state. We have some of the really big guys, the orthopedics companies, certainly Cook, Roche, and some of the really big manufacturers here that are driving a lot of it volume-wise. But as far as the landscape of the companies out there, it's much more on the contract side. It's much more on the how do we put innovation into this system, which sort of begs the question of what does it look like here, other places? Where do you find your clients? Are they local primarily, or are you looking at much more of a national or international marketplace? And just sort of what does it look like to you out there? Is there a lot of demand? Are there peaks and valleys to the process? What does the market look like at the moment for you? Greg, would you like to maybe
Sure.
We'll go back the other way again?
Certainly in 2008 when the recession started, it was slow. But I would say today it is robust and booming big time. Us at GMI, we're fortunate to be in this bandwidth of Indiana, and we certainly don't have to go too far out of the state to stay busy. Now, we do try to do a national presence, not an international presence. We're not that big. We're just under 100 employees. So we'll do the device trade shows out in California with MD&M, and on the East Coast in the Boston area, just trying to get that coastal presence. And we have some clients from West and from East, but primarily it's within Indiana that we do most of our work.
I would say our answer is similar. I would say 60% of our clients across the board are regional, so Indiana or adjacent states, and then the other 40% are kind of peppered around. And I would say that ratio mostly holds true for our clients in the biomedical space as well. I will say that our services are perhaps a bit more narrow than either one of yours. So we take it, certainly the napkin, and we have some great napkins in our history of development, but we take those ideas from that concept stage and then get it to the point where the concept is proved. So it's proof of concept, innovation stage, and then we typically hand that back to the client. So that might be drawings, it might be a physical prototype, it might be both, but they've gotten what they need to know about their design, and then we either the client or we help the client hand it off to a contract manufacturer or their own internal manufacturing. So ours is a bit more focused on that innovation stage, just given the limitations of our environment, and I think what serves our students well.
So I would echo really what Greg and Elizabeth said. You know, the majority of our clients, you know, are local in the state, Indianapolis area, and then a few peppered outside of the state to east and west coast. Yeah, but yeah, the majority of them are here central, and that's kind of why we started the company, right? Was to fill that area in the medical device world here in Indianapolis. I mean, we are a big powerhouse here in the state, but we don't have the design firms like you see out on the east or west coast. That there's a huge infrastructure supporting all those. So that was just one of the gaps that was, you know, it was underserved in our area. So that's kind of why we started the company. And, you know, as far as where we get most of our clients, trade shows and things of that sort, really at this point it's just word of mouth, you know, that we don't do a ton of advertising. It's just from, you know, one client talking to another, or just, you know, over the last 20 years, you know, folks that you know in the industry. It's a pretty tight-knit industry in medical device, and I think word just travels fast. I mean, to the point that the three of us, we've all worked together on projects over the last, you know, 15 years. So it's definitely a small industry, yeah, and the news travels fast. So
Great to be able to build a reputation that way too, though. That makes a stronger presence in the long run, I think. Jake, in that will lead us into sort of the next step. If you could sort of just walk through what are the broad steps to how you bring a device to market, and just give us sort of the 30,000-foot view of what the process looks like there.
Okay, sure. And I did put a handout in there. You can reference it later, but it kind of refers to these 6 steps, and it's how we break them out in our company, but it doesn't really matter if you're doing medical device or TV sets. You're still going through these same phases. It's just how we break them out. But the first step is really understanding, right? Understanding the customer, understanding the market. And so when we dissect that customer piece, well, who's the real customer? Is it the physician only? Well, no, it's not. It's anybody that touches that product. So a lot of people will focus just on that physician, but that's where you miss the boat, right? You got to understand from purchasing what they want out of the product. You got to understand the person even touching the product when it comes in the door and receiving, all the way up into inventory where it's stacked on the shelf. The technologist, what they do to prepare the device, the physician using the device, all the way down to disposal of the device. Who's disposing of it? How are they handling sharps? Whatever it might be, contamination. So you have to understand all of that as your customer, and then you got to go in and ask those questions, interview those customers. You got to interview I guess the entire population, the top of the class and the bottom of the class, understand what all their pain points are. And then a lot of times they don't even understand what their pain points are. They just know this is how I've done it forever. This is how I was trained on it. So at that point, you know, the other piece that you're responsible for is now watching the customer. So you've heard the interview, you've heard their pain points, but now just watch them. And with that watchful eye, you'll pick up on things that are a pain point for the customer. They didn't even notice it, but you know, it's taken longer to do this step or that step. So that's where you just have to observe, right? Observe what's going on with your device as it enters the door all the way until it hits the trash can. So really understanding that customer, but then understanding the market, right? That's one piece of the puzzle. You also need to understand the market. What's your competition doing? How are they addressing the needs? What are the pain points with their device? Understand what the patent landscape looks like. Where are you being blocked? How can you design around things? You know, what do the regulatory pathways look like? So all of that, understanding the market as well. I kind of think of it like the Matrix, right? With Keanu Reeves, right? When he finally could see in ones and zeros, he was inside that matrix. So as a designer, you need to be seeing in ones and zeros. You got to understand the market and the customer that well that you already know what their response is going to be before you even ask the question. And then you're really designing well. So that's kind of the next step, is then ideation, right? Once you understand all that, ideation, you pull some people into a room, and you don't want to just pull in a few engineers, right? Because, you know, they're boring anyways, and they're not going to come up with all these great, so have a different crowd, right? Get some marketing folks in there, get a product folk in there, some people from the production floor, have some users in there, a machine shop guy, right? And that's a better ideation crew, right? And then no bad ideas, right? All the rules are out the window, make it a fun, a loose environment. And this sounds really corny, but put some colorful markers out on the table, Post-it notes, some clay, some fidget toys, whatever. But really, that is corny, but it's setting the stage. Hey, this is a safe environment. It's a fun environment. And if you have a dumb idea, say it, right? Because what it's going to do, it's going to trigger somebody else, right, that says, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to take that a step further. What if we did this? And so those, a lot of times in my experience, you generate that aha moment, right? So anyway, you generate in that ideation phase, 50, 100 ideas, depends on the size of the project. But then you get into your next phase, proof of concept, right? And at that point, you down select, right? You pick your top concept, and you move into creating that prototype. So there, kind of, the banner that I put up is, hey, with the limited, basically with the minimum amount of resources and time, get that proof of concept made, right? So if you can do it on paper and sketch it out, right, or even in SolidWorks or 3D CAD, whatever, but put the minimal amount of time into it, right? Because right now we're not sweating the details, because you're going to learn a ton when you get that first prototype, that first proof of concept. So at this point, don't sweat the details, just get the foundation right. Whatever you need to do to prove that concept, get that foundation right, and that's your proof of concept. So you're not going to sweat all the details. And there's an art there to that proof of concept, right? There's a lot of ways to that. You could spend 20 hours and thousands of dollars, or sketch it out on paper, go to the hardware store. If you still end up proving the concept, go with what gets you there quicker and less resources. So then you kind of move out of there once you've proved the concept into development. And in this phase, we're doing detailed design, 3D models, detailed prints. At the same time you're developing that product, you have to be developing your process too. So you need to be doing your fixtures, jigs, work instructions, incoming QC instructions, whatever it is, right? You have to develop that process at the same time, and then you go into your builds, right? And verification testing, validation testing. But by the time you hit verification testing, it's really a foregone conclusion. You should have proved that the device is already going to pass before you even enter official verification testing. So that's kind of that development phase. And then moving on into launch phase, right? So now we're building up inventory levels for initial launch. You're doing all the training of the sales team, clinical education team if you have one, developing all your marketing materials, digital and brochures, and setting up your sales strategy. And a lot of times what I like to see in that launch phase is a soft launch, if you can afford it, if you have the time for it. You pick however many sites that you're comfortable with, and there you go out and you test all that stuff. You test your sales strategy, you test all your marketing materials, and you test your training, how you're training on it. So it gives you basically that test site for all of that as well. And then the last step then is sustaining that product. So it's hit production. Now you're making sure production can keep up with orders, and you're dealing with any complaints from the field, any scrap or reject on the floor, you're dealing with those. And then at the same time, your product guy is going to come in and say, hey, make these improvements and add this other product, add this SKU, here's some gaps. And so that's the fun side, right, of getting into more new product development. And then you take care of all the other sustaining pieces. So that, 5-10 minute spiel, now that takes hundreds and hundreds of hours. So if anybody can do it really that fast, I'd love to see it. And maybe you can come up and be the next panelist. But
Can I add a
Absolutely.
few
Please
bits
do.
to that?
Please
So I agree with everything you said, and I just wanted to expand on two pieces of it. We have found that this whole idea of interviewing the client, it just becomes such the critical piece, because often a client will say, well, I need a device that looks like this, and they show you a thing, and maybe they do, but asking the questions about actually what they're trying to achieve can change the whole game. We have a client who is based in Indianapolis, Nico Corporation. They make neurosurgical equipment. Very sophisticated in how they think of their design and their products, and their chief technology officer is constantly in surgery watching how the surgical customers are doing things. He's making observations. He's coming back to us then and saying, oh, I'm noticing they're wasting a lot of time in this step. Maybe we could solve this problem. So even a team as sophisticated as that came to us and said, hey, we think we need a cautery device. It should look like this. And they held up one. And the more we started digging into it, this whole hours and hours of process, where we landed with the actual product that's in production now is a device that not only does cautery, but does suction and irrigation. And so we're replacing 3 devices for one. The timeline to market was pretty quick, partly because back to this iteration phase, build the fastest prototype you can that will just prove the point, and then figure out what you need to from it, and build the next one the next week, and just keep going. So again, I just echo all the things that you're saying, and even clients who we have been working with for literally decades, we still can refine that process with them and get more out of the end result and the relationship and the product itself. So it's constantly fun because you're constantly learning with each other the whole time.
Great to have that ability to bounce things back and forth with people who know as much about the process as you do, and to see it from the different perspectives. And I think you really hit it on the head there. It's that difference between what people think they want and what they are really trying to get to, and being able to bridge that gap is a big piece of that. Did you have?
Well, I was just going to say, and what, I'm not sure how up to speed you are, Elizabeth, but we took the handoff from Elizabeth's team on this device she's speaking of, completely redeveloped the manufacturing process to fine-tune it and to get more high precision and quality results on the device for its functionality. And then the chief technology officer goes out and works with a few physicians, and Jake's very familiar with this, and this rolls right back into what Jake was talking about. We call it the voice of the customer, and now we've been through a year redeveloping the design of the device. Just after using it for a few times, and we're ready to launch in September of 2016. 2 months later, we're back to the drawing board, and Joe says, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, and that meant resubmission to the FDA, the whole 9 yards, and we are just now ready to launch it again. And we're all got our fingers crossed that this time it's going to go, and Joe's not going to come back and say, let's do some more changes. So, and I think his board's kind of pushing that direction too. But the last thing I'll iterate on from this subject line is in our world where we work with a lot of startups, and we've got the founder, the inventor coming into our facility and talking to us, and they've got an awesome idea, and there appears to be a need in the marketplace, in the public. There's a problem to be solved. But for us, one of the most important things, and I have found out that it's also extremely important for the investment community that might potentially be an angel investor or later on a venture capital investor for this startup company, is that we call it the feasibility prototype, the proof of concept that Jake was talking about. We nomenclate that as the feasibility prototype. And this is a prototype that might not look anything like what the end product will look like a couple of years down the road, but at least it's to the stage that, number one, we know we can manufacture it, and number two, we know that in the customer's hands it's a viable, usable product that can go to market and earn revenue for everyone down the road. So extremely important step to go through to do that proof of concept, proof of science prototype.
And my questions are all out the window at this point. But that brings us to an interesting point, because Rose-Hulman Ventures has done a really interesting partnership with IU and put together a number of prototypes based on some of the technologies there. Could you talk a little bit about that program and what you guys did, and and what the value of the prototypes is in that case for those businesses.
Great, yeah. And that actually kind of addresses a whole other niche in this environment, which is we call them the docs with ideas category of, of people. So clearly physicians are in practice all day long. They're constantly recognizing ways to improve their outcomes, ways to improve efficiency, all these things. But generally, physicians are in it to, they want to be helping patients. They may not want to be opening a company to make medical devices. So there's this gap of, hey, I have all these ideas, but no ability to get them out there, get them made. So we had some funding to support this idea through the Lilly Endowment, and then also some other funding from IU. And what we figured out was they were able to cultivate several of their physicians who were coming up with ideas in the clinic and had no outlet for them. And they partnered those physicians with the team at Rose-Hulman Ventures, and we were able to comb through, which ideas we thought would be the best fit for our capabilities. And last year it was a record year for us. We ended up having 8 different inventions or prototypes that we made out of the invention disclosures that were coming out of IU Med School. And what was so exciting about that is IURTC is the body at IU that will disclose the technologies and then help commercialize them. So they are handling all the commercialization headaches for the most part for the physicians. The physicians can have the idea, work with us in an iterative way to see those ideas come to life, and then we can transfer it back to IURTC to say, okay, here's at least the starting point for the customer feedback and the next set of the process, and then they can take the next steps in terms of commercialization. So we had everything from a thing that does esophageal sampling to another device that quantifies how much pressure a masseuse or a physical therapist is putting on a patient so they can do it in a repeatable way. So all over the map, all kinds of medical practices that were impacted by this. So it was great fun for us because those were the types of projects where the physician says, here's what I want to achieve, and I'm open to all kinds of ways to achieve it. So that just opens the floodgates for all the project managers and the students to get very creative with how they're going to think about it. And then we get to that process where, okay, well, here's the 3 best. Let's give these a shot.
We came into that process at the back end. So we put together the list of the technologies, and IU did a nice job putting one-pagers together for everybody. And we took that to Massachusetts, MassBio's annual meeting this last year, and we've taken it to Scotland with us. And when people see that there is a working and functional device to it, it really changes the conversation. It goes from, oh, that's just a random technology out there, to that's an actual thing, and that really is key to taking that next step.
And we find that a lot. There's a lot of reasons people may need or want a prototype. It might be to prove it to themselves. It might be to show other people that, hey, this is not just in my head, it's functional. Here, you can benefit from the results too. And it might be also to refine an idea. So it might be that they already have something tangible, and now they need some additional engineering expertise to refine.
Absolutely. Greg, I'm going to come back to you. You had mentioned earlier sort of the difference between working with a startup and a larger corporation. Could you maybe just talk about some of the differences, the way those folks come into the conversation
Sure.
with you, and how you adapt from there?
A startup person comes in, and a lot of times it's a 1-person team or a 2 to 3-person team, and typically they're slanted towards the science. And they're not slanted towards business operations and have ever maybe had experience in running their own business. And so they'll come in and do a pitch to our company. And I'll walk them through the whole process, and to me, I tell them that it's very similar to you're getting ready to pitch to a venture capital group or an angel investment group. And we likewise want to know, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is there a true market for it, and how are you going to get it to market? And what is your idea, and how does your idea solve that problem? And one of the things that you'll learn when you hang around the venture capital and angel investment world is 50% of the bet, and it is a bet truly when you're putting that kind of money into these startups where typically 1, 2 out of 10 make it and the rest don't, so you're hoping that 10x return. covers for the 8 or 9 that didn't make you a return. So they're betting on the management team, the people themselves, and how well they seem to work together, how well they relate, as much as they're betting on the science and the idea and the market potential that's out there. So in the same way, we're gonna select products that we think fits GMI Corporation, and likewise we're doing that same solicitation as far as, or I should say selection, as far as, do we think this is a good team that we can see ourselves partnering with and working with, along with their science and along with their market, versus you bring in a mid-sized to large company that has their own product development organization, usually has the distribution channels established, has their own sales and marketing team, et cetera, and they're just wanting help because either they don't do their own development or they're already full and they're looking to offshoot some of that workload, or maybe they don't manufacture their design and development organization. They have products out on the market, so they hire people to do contract manufacturing for them and pick up, somewhere in that product development phase. So working with those people, it's a whole different story. It's more about hopefully educating them, if they haven't had that experience before, that the sooner they meet with us, because we're more of a manufacturing engineering organization and a manufacturing organization to that type of client than what we are product development. Because they'll come to you, and like you heard me say earlier, one of the biggest red flags that we hear is someone comes in and says, I've got this thing 100% designed, I've got it prototyped, it is ready to go, just take this bill of material, go buy all this stuff and start making it for us. That is a huge red flag for us, because we're the ones that's going to look bad in that customer's eyes if something goes wrong with the way that product's going together in manufacturing and we can't make the quantities that they need, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's sometimes an educational purpose to teach them, meet with us as early as you can, let us review your design, and maybe offer some advice and some tangential directions.
Thank you.
I'll second you on that, Greg. So I'm not a contract manufacturer, so I'm not trying to sell you anything here. I'm a designer, right, and a developer. But exactly like Greg said, we do the same thing. When we enter that development phase, we're identifying our suppliers early. Even if we know how to design injection molded parts, stamp parts, machine parts, it doesn't really matter. We're still going to try to identify that supplier like Greg or whomever it is, and bring them in on the design, because they will have some feedback. If you do a good job on design, it's going to be minimal, but they're still going to have some feedback on tolerances, or if you totally miss the boat, they could completely change your world. So you definitely don't want to bring them in at the end. So absolutely agree.
And there's two other areas that I think that we should hit on that we are certainly not experts at GMI, and that's legal and regulatory. And since we're speaking in the medical device environment, very early on we counsel, especially with the startup customers that we deal with, that they need to be seeking intellectual property help, to make sure that they're not, like Jake was talking about earlier, that they are designing around any IP that exists out there, to look and see what IP that does exist. Then the second thing is to find out, especially in the world of medical device, hopefully there's a predicate device out there and they can take the 510K route. Now we're very good at partnering with a regulatory firm that's helping our customers, and we'll often tell them you need to go find a company that's what they do for a living. I see Diana sitting out there, and that's certainly what she does. And Diana's one of the firms that we certainly recommend. But those are two very important things that someone in the medical device world has to tackle all the way up during that feasibility prototype stage, because you need to know, can you get IP yourself? Are you not infringing on someone else's? And are you heading down the right pathway for your regulatory purposes?
Great. And again, you have provided the perfect segue. We're going to take one quick pit stop. Elizabeth, we have a question here from the audience. They're curious as to what part of IU you were partnered with, and I know they've restructured since that happened. Yeah. So if you could say maybe who you were working with and And we can figure out where that is now
Yeah,
today.
so IURTC, so IU Research and Technology Corporation, is who we were partnered with. And then at the time, and I think for the most part this is still true, they saw the disclosures of the medical school and across the university of professors. So any professor that has an idea that would like to disclose it and potentially seek a patent, that went through their office. And I think there has been a little bit of reorganization, but the commercialization part I know is still within their purview, at least the way I understand it.
That's still under that, but I
So-
think most of it has shifted now from under Bill Steffen and engagement to Simon Atkinson as somebody was kind enough to put the title down here, Vice Chancellor of Research. So
yes,
yeah.
yes. And Tony Armstrong was the primary point person that we would work with, and of course then he has a whole team of what he calls technology managers who are helping the faculty, kind of pick and choose what disclosures should be taken to the next level.
Right. Great. Hopefully that answered and addressed that question. So back to what we were just getting at there with Greg's comments. The regulatory path and the prototyping and all of those things all kind of have to work together as you go down through this pathway. Is there an order to that, or is there a process you tend to look at following with that? Which comes first, the prototype or the pathway? And anybody can throw in on that.
Sure. I can take
I'm looking at
first
you.
crack at it. And I've been through this process numerous times, and really the answer is both, right? There is no one comes before the other, it's both. So when I sit down with a project like that, I need to know what the regulatory path is, what my potential options are, and then as a designer then sitting and going through that process, now I know what let's say there's two potential regulatory paths, and certain features will kick you into this path and certain features will take you down this path. So as a designer, I need to know that if we decide, hey, I'm going to add this feature set to the device, it's going to change my regulatory path and therefore extend the project by 6 months and add a certain amount of dollar signs there as well. So I need to really know both. And it's not that complicated of a piece. I think it's just that early investigation on that regulatory path, and then always keeping that in the back of your mind during the early design stages and prototyping.
In that process. We have a couple of other audience questions here, and it sort of just fits in with that whole what is the process and how does that all go. At what point in there do you include biocompatibility requirements? We're going to hop into the weeds a little bit here, I think.
So I can tell you we never deal with that. And that's related to kind of our narrower scope of work. So typically we're relying on the client to have some additional resource to guide them on some of these questions. And something like biocompatibility would, of course, be of interest. And where we would be involved in that is the client and their guidance is saying, let's tend towards these materials and these materials because we know there's a cleaner pathway for those materials versus a different choice. So again, we're taking input from experts in the field that will have an impact on the design, but Rose-Hulman Ventures itself is not a guiding force on those decisions.
I know that we, on any medical device project, and that's where the three of us up here, we are all a little different and complementary to one another. Greg, they have a expertise in the contract manufacturing, and then Rose really focuses on that upfront, the ideation and proof of concept phase, and then we kind of spread the whole gamut, but we work with these folks as well. But for us, since we are spreading, going all the way to the finish line, up front, we're thinking about that biocompatibility piece. So I've done a lot of work with the different biocompatibility testing companies throughout the country. And basically when we're designing, maybe not up in that proof of concept phase, but shortly after that in development, we're picking materials that we know are either already, a lot of plastics and whatnot, you're already going to say, all right, we're going after something that's 10993 compliant, right? And so then we don't even have to worry about doing biocompatibility testing on that particular plastic, right? So if we can stick with all parts that are known and tested, you know, that really helps us out. And then, you know, there are still situations where you're putting together some unknowns and you need to do some biocompatibility testing, and, you know, there's great places throughout the country that will guide you in that process. And so, yeah, it's a big part of, you know, just something that you need to keep in mind during that development phase.
And for us, it's during what we call the alpha prototype stage, which, just like you said, Jake, right after that feasibility prototype where you've been going to the hardware store and grabbing components off the shelf and putting this Frankenstein-looking device together just to prove out that the science works. Now you're heading down a pathway of what's the production intent of the design need to look like and function, and we call that the alpha prototype stage, and you might go through an alpha 1 all the way to an alpha 5 until you get that figured out, but it's immediately during that alpha stage that you have to start thinking about what is your component product selection, what type of plastics, et cetera.
In that whole process. And forgive me, for I am not an engineer in this space. There is a follow-on to that, and does your design system follow Part 820 design controls? Again, in the weeds.
Yes.
Maybe somebody could explain what that is, and then maybe how that relates into the process in there, assuming that is a regulatory consideration.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, so in medical device, right, it's a little different than in consumer goods or some other industries, right, where you could just sit down and start designing and come up with a product and start selling it, right? So in medical device, it's not like that. We're regulated by the FDA, right? So internally at your company, if you're doing the product development, you need to have a procedure in place that guarantees that your output delivers something that would satisfy the regulatory, the FDA body, right? So when you're going through all those phases we talked about, you know, it's going to talk about, hey, you need to have your customer requirements, you need to have your engineering requirements, you need to, and when that auditor pulls on the thread for this particular engineering requirement, they need to see that that verification test was done. They need to see that it passed and the validation was completed. So when we talk about design controls, that's part of what we're talking about is not only did we do it right, did we develop a great process, but how did we document it? Show me the requirements, show me the verification testing, show me the validation summary, show me the risk analysis, all that stuff all the way through. So I think it's important when you, whether you have an internal team or whether you find an external team, just because somebody can develop a product, you need to make sure that they can develop a medical device product because it's a very unique thing, right? And, you know, as far as those design controls, you'll need to have those in place because once you launch, if you don't and you get audited and you can't produce that stuff, you're going to get warning letters. They're potentially going to come to your place, shut down production, whatever it is. So just make sure your internal team or external team, you know, is dotting the I's and crossing the T's there.
And at GMI, we've lived this in the last 5 years. You know, I've been there 10 years, and when the original owner of GMI and myself, we were basically it. Started out, we were, if you will, a manufacturing engineering group and a contract manufacturer. And then as we brought on more and more of a product development team, you know, we had to certify ourselves in the world of ISO in 13485 that we had product development controls. And we brought in we had a quality manager, but we actually, that person retired and we brought on a new quality manager that had the right background so that we could get the, you know, the 21 CFR realm of product development, you know, in our quality systems. And then, like just Jake said, we've got procedure after procedure after procedure that we walk through the design development stage, and that we document that so that not only will we pass our next ISO audit, we could pass an FDA regulatory, walk through, and in some cases the customer audits at that detail level. So very important.
Absolutely.
And I can say that, again, because we're more on that very front end, we don't hold ourselves to those certification standards. However, that doesn't mean that we are not thinking about them often. So a great example is we had a product we were designing that had a LED light source embedded in it. And in order to design the heat sink, we had to take in certain considerations of the surface temperature of that handle, which of course, comes back to these regulations. But again, we were relying on the expertise of our clients and their external experts to deliver the guidance. Of course, we need to make sure that that thing actually is still hitting the right temperature. It becomes basically a design criteria in our eyes. But then when it gets handed over, we're handing over the critical, knowledge that we've developed along the way, so it can be certified in the full extent. So we can't escape the outcomes, but we ourselves are not certifying the result, at least at that very early stage.
And as with anything in this industry, the earlier you start thinking about the regulatory conformity and needs, the better for everybody in the process. It's all good to be with the IP attorneys, not so good to be with the other kinds. So build those relationships early and often in that process. We've covered, I can't quite see the clock from here, but I know we're starting to run a little bit out of time. Wanted to talk a little bit about pitfalls, and we've touched on it a little bit. But if you could give advice to your clients, if they're coming to you for the first time, what would be the things you would tell them you wish they knew, or things that they would be prepared for when they come to sit down with you?
The number one question that we always start with in one form or another is, why do you think you need this? And not, of course, not to deter business or anything like that, but going back to that question, what a client might think they're after is actually different than what they might need. And that can be a very fun process, but that's a number one pitfall for us. When a client has an expectation over here and engineering might say that the actual solution is over here. So really bringing together expectations from both sides is something that we are constantly aware of and just conversing about. But yeah, just again, making sure that everybody's on the same page. The other thing that happens in early design stages is that you are constantly in learning mode, because you make one decision that influences something else, and you find out a new piece of information which negates something you learned yesterday. And so to keep that client in that constant flow of information is such a necessity, because then at the end of the week when you show them what you built and they thought it was going to look like this, there isn't that clash of surprise. So yeah, just that constant awareness of how design is evolving and what we're learning along the way, and marrying that with needs and expectations has been our number one learning. And that even relates to things we've already discussed. Very early on in the Rose-Hulman Ventures trajectory, they figured out that they've got to talk to the manufacturer during the design phase, because it's quite possible if you don't to hand off something that's not manufacturable. So, I mean, you just have to...
That would be bad, right?
Yeah,
okay,
that's bad.
Just
So yeah, just constantly checking in across, not just with your client, but down the pipeline too.
I'll answer it in two ways, Kristin. With the large customer that we deal with, it's the ones that come in and say everything's ready to go, and their top management already has expectations on product delivery, and they've already made promises maybe to their distribution teams on product delivery, and basically they're like, here's this 300 line item bill of materials. Just go out and buy this stuff. We'll even tell you where we bought for the first 5 that we built, prototypes at our place. And, in 2 months you ought to be able to start building 100 a week. It literally happens, and that's going to be a pitfall, because number one, they have not allowed us to even look at the design and look at it from a quality perspective, and to make sure all the operators' instructions are in place, all the training's in place, all the validation for processes are up. They have no concept sometimes of that. And next thing you know, we're 6 months down the road and we haven't started making the first device because we're getting all those ducks in a row. They don't like hearing that, but it's reality. And then when you look at the startup company, again, picture the founder walking in, typically with no business experience, and they've gotten some early traction. They've got a cool idea. There seems to be a market out there, and they maybe got a grant, enough money to get them started. But then all of a sudden, they need truly some angel investment. They need truly some venture investment. And then that can span out in multiple directions of why it's a pitfall. Number one, are they really a business-minded person? Are they the right team that's going to garner the investment, that somebody's going to make that bet on them? Are they so locked into their science that they can't get out of that world? Maybe they hadn't considered the regulatory pathway and it's a nightmare. And people typically aren't going to invest if they see that, obviously. There's just on and on and on many different directions that can be a pitfall with them. So you got to kind of help them think about and look at all these different things before they're already making their millions in their mind.
So, and I think that I would have three things. And so I'm glad that you asked me to go last, because I'd like to steal one from each of you, if you don't mind. Definitely understanding the customer, right? I see that as a pitfall, right? So often, and you hear it, you've heard it a ton this morning on the panel, but the customer just wants to come and give you the solution, right? But you got to keep asking why. Why do you want this? And then eventually you'll get down to what the true customer requirement is. So in that whole understanding phase and just watching them, sometimes they don't even, what they're asking for, they don't even know it until you go and watch them in the procedure and you see the product flow through all the channels. So I think that understanding, to me, a lot of times people jump past that phase and are already designing. So that's a pitfall that I see, that phase gets skipped over quite a bit. And then the second one Greg mentioned, and it's near and dear to me because I've made those mistakes in the past, earlier on in my career. Hopefully I don't make too many more of them, but is what he talked about as far as bringing in the supplier early. So if you make the mistake of designing it all internal, using stuff off the shelf, McMaster car, whatever hardware store, and then you lock down that design, and then you go talk to your manufacturer, and they warn you, hey, we're going to have a problem manufacturing this part. And you can push them and you can get that part made. But sometimes in your gut, as an engineer, you have to know, sitting across from that supplier, when that's real, right? And if you push that supplier, yeah, they're probably going to make it for you. And then you're going to deal with a headache for 2 or 3 years or longer. So that's what I would say, is bring that supplier in early. And when they really press on something, you're going to have to make that decision on, is this a real thing? Do I need to change the design entirely or modify to appease the supplier? So yeah, that piece. And then the third is just prototype. Prototype. Rinse and repeat, right? So have a very low threshold to just go put something together, see how it works. There's a good chance it might change some of your requirements. It might change what you're doing, but that iterative cycle, of rinse and repeat, plan on going through it multiple times. If you think you're going to do it one cycle on a complex product, you're probably not going to have a world-class product. So.
Well, we're gonna start to wrap things up here. I'm going to ask one final question to each of you. If you had one tip to give to somebody around doing a product launch, what would that tip be? And Elizabeth, that may or may not apply to you. So
I have some thoughts.
I'll go first on this one, that way. So I think for me, it would just be a soft launch. If you're able to, if it fits in within your timelines, depending on the scale of your product that you're launching, pick 10 sites. Again, it's going to differ for everybody, but pick a segment of the market to go out and test all of your sales strategy, all your marketing collateral, all your training of your sales reps, all your clin ed training, but do a soft launch. That way you can test that, just like you would test a design internal at your facility first. this is a way to test all of your marketing, your sales strategy, and whatnot. So that would be my recommendation.
Mine is a little bit like that, and it's mostly learning from how our clients have had success, but especially in the medical device area, a user, say it's a physician or not, will never blame themselves on a bad result. They will blame it on the product. And so I've seen companies have really good success in making sure that their initial customer base is well trained, understands the product, understands the capabilities and maybe limitations of the product. And so just really putting energy into that initial customer base so that they can be good advocates of the device because they understand it. Perhaps, doing something larger with less detail could backfire if people aren't understanding it, therefore aren't using it correctly, and therefore not getting the results that you hope and that they would hope.
Greg, we'll give you the final word.
The word comes to my mind is patience. And if you can have patience in that whole process, then everything that Jake and Elizabeth have talked about becomes a reality. And behind that, some incredible cost savings too. If the customer comes to you and says, I want to make $100,000 in year one, well, they're going to pay a lot of capital expense for you to tool up to be able to manufacture at that rate, especially when it's a complex type of a device, versus if you do that soft launch like Jake's talking about, and you only make, say, $1,000 in year one, you're going to find out that year two, when maybe you do make $50,000, $25,000, year two, Gen 2 device is not going to look much like Gen 1's device because you found out a lot of things. You found out some cost improvements. So all along the way, if you use that patience and you plant that expectation to your board of directors, to your investment community, and to everyone so that you don't put all this extraneous pressure on you that was unnecessary if you just thought about it, you saved everybody a lot of money and you end up with a much better, more robust product in the end, and hopefully happy customers instead of aggravated customers because they got one of the bad ones that you were pushing for in the early beginning.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. Thank you to our panel here today. Wonderful job. Fascinating conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Wanted to let you know we will not be meeting next month. I think the way the dates fall, it's the week of Thanksgiving, so we won't be here in November, but we will be back in December and hope to see you all here with us. Thank you again, and thank you to our panel and to our host at Barnes & Thornburg today. Thank you.